5 in the morning, and the candle has not yet been lit. In the east wing of a great country house, a young heiress lies awake in the dark, staring at a ceiling painted with cherubs she did not choose and gods she does not believe in. Somewhere below, a servant is already kneeling at a cold hearth, coaxing the first flame of the day to life before anyone with a title has even opened their eyes. By the time the sun rises fully over the park, this house will look like paradise. But paradise, as the diaries and account books of the 1700s reveal, was built on a schedule no one ever spoke of aloud. This is the forgotten machinery behind aristocratic life in the 18th century, and almost none of it survived in the paintings. Before we step deeper into this forgotten world, subscribe for more stories hidden in history. To understand the aristocracy of the 1700s, you have to understand that a great house was never just a home. It was a performance, staged every single day for an audience that included neighbors, rivals, servants, and even one's own family. Estate records from English country houses, French chateaux, and noble households across the German states show the same pattern. Mornings began not with leisure, but with ritual. A lady of the house might spend 2 or 3 hours simply being dressed, not because she was vain, but because her appearance, down to the powder in her hair, was a public statement of her family's wealth and discipline. Letters from the period describe maids who specialized in nothing but hairdressing, spending entire mornings constructing styles that would have to survive a full day of scrutiny. Breakfast, when it came, was modest by aristocratic standards. Bread, chocolate, or tea, perhaps cold meat. The real performance was reserved for dinner, served in the early afternoon and stretched across hours, with course after course arranged less for hunger than for spectacle. Account books from estates of the period list staggering quantities of imported sugar, citrus, and spices, luxuries that had traveled thousands of miles to sit, briefly, on a single table before being cleared away. But here's the part rarely shown in paintings. Much of that food was never eaten. It was displayed, admired, and discarded. Waste was not an accident. It was the point. Stay with us as we uncover what life was truly like behind these magnificent estates. Behind every gilded room stood a small army most visitors never noticed. A great house of this period could employ 30, 50, sometimes over 100 servants, cooks, footmen, grooms, laundresses, gardeners, and stewards, each occupying a precise rung in an invisible hierarchy. Household manuals and stewards' correspondence from the era reveal rules so strict they bordered on theatrical. A footman was instructed never to speak unless addressed, never to be seen entering through the front of the house, never to let his presence interrupt the conversation between his employers. Servants moved through hidden corridors and back staircases built specifically so that the appearance of effortless aristocratic life would never be broken by the sight of someone actually producing it. And yet, the relationship between aristocrats and those who served them was rarely simple cruelty. Personal letters and household diaries describe genuine, if deeply unequal, bonds. A nursemaid who raised 3 generations of one family. A steward trusted with decisions worth more than most men would earn in a lifetime. Loyalty was real. So was dependency. A servant dismissed without reference could starve. A family without devoted staff could collapse within weeks. Luxury, it turns out, was never created by aristocrats alone. It was built, daily, by hands history chose not to paint. The gardens tell their own story. Estate maps and landscaping records show that the grounds surrounding a great house were not decoration, they were ideology. Geometric French gardens with their rigid symmetry declared that nature itself bowed to aristocratic order. Later in the century, the more naturalistic English landscape styles suggested something subtler, that true nobility didn't need to dominate nature, only to appear in harmony with it. Either way, a garden could take decades and small fortunes to perfect, reshaped again and again to match shifting fashions and tastes and philosophy. Before we go further into the private world behind these walls, if this kind of forgotten history fascinates you, subscribe. There's much more buried here. Inside the house, education followed its own quiet logic. Daughters of the aristocracy were rarely taught for their own ambitions. Tutoring records and family correspondence show girls learning French, music, dancing, and needlework, skills designed to make them more desirable on the one true examination that awaited them: marriage. A noble marriage was rarely about affection. It was a contract between estates, drafted sometimes years in advance, negotiated by fathers who treated their daughters' futures the way they treated land boundaries, with maps, lawyers, and very little sentiment. Letters from young aristocratic women, preserved in family archives, occasionally crack open this cold arrangement to reveal something rawer: fear, resignation, sometimes quiet hope that the stranger chosen for them might prove kind. Sons faced their own invisible cage. As heirs, they were trained from childhood not to live but to inherit. Educated in estate management, law, and politics, groomed to one day become custodians of a name larger than themselves. Diaries from younger sons, those without inheritance, reveal a darker truth. Many were pushed into the church or military, not from calling, but because the family fortune could not be divided. Behind the powdered wigs and silk waistcoats stood young men quietly aware that their entire identity had been decided before they could speak. This is the tension that historical records keep circling back to, the painful distance between the public image of aristocratic life and what actually happened behind closed doors. Portraits show serene faces and confident postures, but private letters, often written late at night, reveal something entirely different: anxiety over debt hidden behind appearances of wealth, grief disguised behind etiquette, loneliness wrapped in silk. Many great families lived far beyond what their estates could sustain, borrowing quietly to fund the very banquets meant to prove their prosperity. A single bad harvest, one failed investment, or an unlucky marriage could unravel generations of careful image building almost overnight. By candlelight, after the guests had gone and the servants had finally been allowed to rest, the truth of aristocratic life settled into something far more human than the portraits ever suggested. Behind every chandelier was a debt. Behind every gown was an arrangement. Behind every smile in a painted family portrait was a person living inside a role they had not chosen, in a house that was less a home than a stage no one was ever permitted to leave. If you've enjoyed traveling back into this forgotten world, subscribe for more hidden stories from history, because behind every great house, there was always more than what the portraits showed.